The laughter wasn't loud, but it cut deeper than shouting ever could. It lived in the sideways glances, the raised eyebrows, the quiet smirks exchanged just outside her hospital room. Dr. Aisha Rahman felt at the moment she walked into the emergency wing that morning, clutching her worn clipboard a little tighter than usual. Her white coat hung neatly on her shoulders, her hijab perfectly pinned, her posture calm and professional. Yet to them, she didn't look like someone worth listening to. She looked like a mistake. She had learned long ago that some rooms went silent not out of respect, but doubt. This was one of those rooms. The senior doctors were already there, gathered near the nurse's station, discussing a critical incoming case. A VIP patient, they said. Severe internal injuries. Time sensitive. No room for error. Aisha listened carefully, her mind already mapping possible complications, running through protocols. She waited for a pause so she could offer her assessment, but the conversation moved on without her, as if she were invisible. When she finally spoke, her voice calm and measured, suggesting an alternative procedure that could reduce the risk of organ failure, one of the consultants chuckled under his breath. Another shook his head. Someone muttered that she was still too green for cases like this. Aisha felt her cheeks warm, but she didn't argue. She had learned that arguing only fed their assumptions. Instead, she nodded, stepped back, and did what she always did. She waited. What they didn't know was that waiting had once kept her alive. Years earlier, waiting had meant hiding in the dark as explosions rattled the walls of her childhood home. Waiting had meant holding her younger brother's hand while praying the night would pass. Waiting had meant surviving long enough to become something more than a statistic. Those years had shaped her into someone who didn't need validation to know her worth. Still, being dismissed never stopped hurting. By midday, the emergency wing was buzzing. The VIP patient had arrived, surrounded by security and hospital administrators. The pressure was thick in the air, every decision scrutinized. Aisha assisted quietly, her hands steady, her focus absolute. She noticed subtle signs others missed, changes in blood pressure, irregular breathing patterns that hinted at deeper trauma. She mentioned it once, softly, but it was brushed aside. An hour later, alarms screamed. The patient's condition deteriorated rapidly, exactly as Aisha had feared. Chaos erupted. Doctors rushed, nurses shouted vitals, and someone barked orders that contradicted another's. In the middle of it all, Aisha stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise with clarity and calm. She adjusted the treatment plan on the fly, compensating for the oversight. For a moment, everyone listened. The patient stabilized, just barely. The room exhaled. Some of the doctors looked at Aisha differently then, not with respect yet, but confusion. How had she known? Before anyone could say anything, a deep, unfamiliar sound rolled through the building. At first, it felt like distant thunder. Then the windows began to vibrate. Ceiling lights trembled. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as the noise grew louder, heavier, unmistakable. A helicopter. Not just any helicopter. The rhythmic, powerful thump of rotor blades announced something far bigger than a routine air ambulance. Staff rushed to the windows, peering out in disbelief as a massive Black Hawk descended onto the hospital grounds, its dark silhouette dominating the sky. Security scrambled. Administrators panicked. No one had been informed of a military landing. Within minutes, the emergency wing doors burst open, and uniformed personnel poured in with precision and urgency. Their presence commanded instant silence. At their center walked a high-ranking officer, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. His eyes scanned the room once, then stopped on Aisha. He approached her directly, ignoring everyone else. The entire wing held its breath. "Ma'am," he said, his voice firm and respectful, "we're here for you. We need you by rank." The words hung in the air like a shockwave. By rank. Aisha's heartbeat didn't change. She simply nodded, as if this were an ordinary interruption to her day. Around her, jaws dropped. The same doctors who had laughed hours earlier stared in stunned silence, their faces pale with realization. As she followed the officer toward the exit, memories surfaced uninvited. Memories of another uniform, another life she rarely spoke about. Before she was Dr. Aisha Rahman, she had been Captain Rahman. Combat medic, special operations. She had served where names were erased and missions never acknowledged. Where lives depended on split-second decisions and steady hands under fire. She had learned medicine not in pristine lecture halls, but in dust and chaos, treating wounds under night skies lit by flares. She had saved soldiers who would never know her full story, and lost others she would never forget. When her service ended, she chose a quieter battlefield. Hospitals instead of war zones. Patients instead of soldiers. She didn't wear her medals or speak of her rank. She wanted to heal, not impress. But the past had a way of returning when it was needed most. Outside, the Black Hawk waited, engines still humming. The officer briefed her quickly. A classified operation had gone wrong. A team member was critically injured in a remote location, and Aisha was the only medic with the exact combination of experience and clearance required. Time was running out. She boarded the helicopter without hesitation. As it lifted off, she looked down at the hospital shrinking below. She wondered if those walls would feel different now, if the people inside would see her differently. The flight was fast and silent, cutting through clouds toward an undisclosed destination. Aisha reviewed the mission details, her mind shifting seamlessly back into combat mode. There was no fear, only focus. She had done this before. She could do it again. When they landed, the situation was worse than expected. The injured operative was unconscious, bleeding internally, his vitals unstable. The environment was hostile, resources limited. Aisha took command immediately, issuing instructions with quiet authority. No one questioned her. They moved as one, trusting her completely. Hours blurred together as she worked tirelessly, improvising with what little she had, drawing on years of experience. Sweat soaked her scrubs. Her hands never shook. When the operative finally stabilized, a collective sigh of relief swept through the team. Another life pulled back from the edge. As the sun rose, painting the horizon in soft gold, Aisha allowed herself a moment to breathe. Exhaustion settled into her bones, but so did satisfaction. This was why she had chosen this path. Not recognition, not praise, but purpose. She returned to the hospital later that day, quieter this time, no helicopter announcement, no fanfare. Yet everything felt different. Heads turned as she walked the halls. Conversations hushed. The same consultants who had dismissed her now greeted her with awkward respect. Some apologized outright, others didn't know how to meet her eyes. Aisha didn't dwell on it. She had patients to see, charts to review, lives to touch. Respect earned through spectacle was fleeting. Respect earned through consistency lasted longer. In the weeks that followed, subtle changes took root. Her opinions were sought instead of ignored. Junior staff gravitated toward her, inspired by her calm confidence. She mentored without ego, teaching not just medicine, but resilience. One afternoon, she found herself back in the same emergency wing where the mocking had begun. A young doctor stood frozen, overwhelmed by a critical case. Aisha stepped in gently, guiding him through the procedure, steadying his nerves. When it was over, he looked at her with gratitude and something else, belief. That was when she understood the true impact of that day. Not the helicopter, not the shock, but the shift it sparked. The reminder that competence doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it waits patiently, enduring doubt until the moment it's needed most. Aisha never told her story unless asked, and even then, she kept it simple. She preferred to let her work speak. Yet her presence alone became a quiet challenge to assumptions, a living testament that strength wore many faces. For those who had once mocked her, the lesson lingered long after the rotor blades faded from memory. They learned that titles didn't always come wrapped in arrogance, and heroes didn't always seek the spotlight. And for Aisha, the journey continued. Every day was another chance to serve, to heal, to prove, mostly to herself, that she was exactly where she belonged. If there's one thing her story teaches, it's this: never underestimate someone because they don't fit your expectations. The quiet ones, the overlooked ones, the ones who endure without complaint often carry the deepest strength. And sometimes, when the world finally needs it, that strength arrives with the thunder of a Black Hawk and the weight of undeniable truth. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you see people a little differently, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this remind us that resilience is real, courage is quiet, and respect is earned when it's least expected. Stay curious, stay kind, and never stop believing in the power of hidden potential. The first thing everyone noticed about the old man was not his limp, or the way his hair had gone completely white long before it thinned. It was his skin. Ink covered him in layers that time had faded but not erased. Lines of names, dates, symbols, coordinates, unit crests, foreign scripts, and shapes no one could fully understand without living the life that carved them there. Under the harsh sun of the coastal training base, his tattoos looked like a map of wars long finished, stories no one had asked to hear anymore. To the younger men running past him in formation, he looked out of place. A relic, a question mark. He stood near the edge of the training field, leaning slightly on a wooden cane, watching Navy SEAL candidates push through another brutal evolution. Sweat soaked their shirts, faces tight with pain and pride. They were young, strong, loud with confidence, convinced that the world ahead of them was something to be conquered. The old man watched quietly, eyes calm, breathing slow, as if the chaos in front of him was familiar enough to feel almost comforting. One of the trainees, barely in his mid-20s, noticed him during a water break. The kid had fresh muscles, a clean face, and just enough arrogance to think curiosity was harmless. He nudged a teammate, smirked, and glanced again at the old man's arms, neck, and hands. Ink everywhere. Too much ink. The kind of tattoos you expect on someone who never learned restraint. The question came out half joking, half disrespectful. Why so many tattoos, old man? It was the kind of question meant to get a laugh, not an answer. The old man didn't react at first. He just kept looking at the training field, watching one candidate stumble and another pull him up without being told. His eyes softened at that. Only then did he slowly turn his head. His face carried deep lines, not just from age but from things remembered too clearly. He didn't look angry. That somehow made the air heavier. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, rough, and steady. Not the voice of someone trying to prove anything. It was the voice of someone who had already paid the price. He began with a memory instead of an explanation. He talked about being 18 years old, stepping off a bus with a duffel bag and a heart full of reckless purpose. About thinking courage was loud and fear was something you could beat out of yourself. About believing survival was guaranteed if you were strong enough. He remembered his first day in training, the cold water, the screaming instructors, the moment he realized he was not special. Just another body being tested. As he spoke, the joking smiles faded. The candidates leaned closer without realizing it. He told them about his first deployment, about the smell of diesel and dust, about the way night felt heavier in foreign places. He described teammates who laughed too hard, because laughter kept the fear from showing. Men who wrote letters home pretending everything was fine. Men who carried pictures in their pockets like armor. Then he explained the first tattoo. It wasn't about style. It wasn't rebellion. It was a name. The name of a teammate who didn't make it home. A man who had covered his position during an extraction, buying seconds with his life. The old man had survived that night. The name on his skin was the weight of that survival. He said the second tattoo came a year later. Another name. Another mission that went wrong in ways no briefing ever prepares you for. Another empty seat on a flight back. He stopped counting after a while, not because the losses stopped, but because the ink became something else. A language only he and the dead understood. Each tattoo marked a promise. To remember. To carry forward what others could not. As he continued, the training field seemed to quiet, as if the wind itself had decided to listen. He spoke of guilt, not in dramatic terms, but as a constant companion. Survivor's guilt that followed him home, sat beside him at dinner, lay awake with him at night. He spoke of waking up reaching for weapons that weren't there, of learning how silence could be louder than gunfire. He talked about coming home to a wife who tried to understand, who learned to read his moods the way he once read terrain. About a marriage strained by long absences and things he could never fully explain. About a daughter who once asked why he never smiled in pictures anymore. That question hurt more than any wound he'd taken overseas. One tattoo on his forearm, he explained, was a small symbol almost faded into the skin. That one marked the day he almost quit. The day he stood in a bathroom staring at his reflection, wondering if the world would be better without him in it. He had survived combat, but peace was a different kind of battlefield. That tattoo was not about strength. It was about choosing to stay. He told them how age eventually slowed him down. How the teams got younger and faster, and he became the old one in the room. The one who talked less and listened more. The one who learned that leadership wasn't about shouting orders but about standing steady when everything else shook. When retirement finally came, it didn't feel like relief. It felt like loss all over again. The uniform went into a closet. The routine disappeared. The brotherhood scattered across the country. Some found peace. Some didn't. The old man attended more funerals in his 50s than he had weddings in his 20s. The tattoos kept growing, even then. Not because he needed more reminders, but because memory demanded space. One tattoo marked the date he buried his wife, taken too early by illness. Another was for his daughter, who grew up, forgave him for his absences, and taught him how to be present again. That one was the only tattoo he smiled about. He explained that every line of ink was a chapter. Not a boast, not a decoration, a record of love, loss, fear, courage, and endurance. A way to keep people alive when the world was determined to forget them. By the time he finished, the young men stood silently, sweat cooling on their skin, pride replaced by something heavier and more valuable. Respect. The question that had started as a joke now felt like a lesson they hadn't known they needed. The old man looked back at the training field and said that strength fades, speed disappears, and titles mean very little in the end. What lasts are the marks you leave on others and the choices you make when no one is watching. He said the tattoos weren't there to impress anyone. They were there to remind him who he was when everything else tried to take that away. Then he shifted his weight on the cane and added something softer. He said that one day, these young men would carry their own invisible tattoos. Memories that couldn't be washed off. Moments that would define them. And when that day came, he hoped they would carry them with honor, not bitterness. With humility, not ego. The instructor finally called the candidates back into formation. The old man nodded once and began to walk away, slow and steady, leaving behind a group of men who had just received a lesson no training manual could teach. The young SEAL who had asked the question stood frozen for a moment longer. Something inside him had changed. He would remember this day years later, after his own losses, his own scars. He would remember that tattoos weren't always ink. Sometimes they were carried in the way a man stood, the way he spoke, the way he endured. As the old man disappeared down the path, the sun caught the faded ink on his arms one last time. Not as decoration, but as testimony. And maybe that is why stories like this matter. Because behind every scar, visible or not, is a human being who survived something worth honoring. If this story moved you, if it reminded you to respect the battles others fight quietly, then take a moment to show your support. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and carry this lesson forward. Some marks are meant to be remembered, not judged.